All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome. First of all, big thank you for joining us today. We are going to be doing a discussion on the topic, your AI code spend is soaring, but can you prove its ROI? And this is a lead dev online panel discussion created in partnership with Harness. So over the last 2 years or so, agentic models have gotten a lot better at a very fast pace, and adoption is really taking off across our industry. So, as these tools become a more routine part of how engineering teams work, more companies are starting to ask for better guardrails around spending. And that is what we're here to talk about today. So, generally, how to evaluate your AI spend, optimize it, and prove the return on it. This discussion will last about 45 minutes, and then after that, myself and the panelists will go over to the lead dev Slack and we'll answer some of your questions in the panel Q&A channel there. But in the meantime, we will probably also have some time to answer questions live. So please do submit those using the Q&A feature on Zoom, and we'll get to them if we can. So without further ado, let's get started with some introductions. My name is Amanda Sopkin. I am based in Brooklyn in New York City, and I lead the open telemetry team at Datadog. So we mainly focus on making our product work well for OTel customers. And like many of you, I'm guessing pretty much all of you, I have been thinking a lot about how engineering teams can measure the impact of AI tools. So I'm excited to get into this today. And I am joined by several panelists who can share their experiences and insights on this topic. So I will let them introduce themselves. Martin, do you want to start?
Sure. My name is Martin Reynolds. I'm field CTO at Harness, where I spend most of my days working with enterprise customers, helping them with their software delivery from end to end.
Awesome, thanks. And Claire, do you want to introduce yourself next?
Thank you, Amanda. Yeah, I'm Claire. I'm a director of engineering at NA10 at the moment, overseeing all of the revenue-related teams, so all of the enterprise functionality, the scale functionality, our SaaS offering, and growth work. So I've got definitely different perspectives on the AI in the different kind of teams in like SRE versus growth versus product engineering. So it's going to be hopefully a really interesting discussion today.
Definitely. And then Lawrence, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Lawrence. I am a product engineer at a company called Incident.io. So I lead AI here, which means I spend most of my day working both on producing the product that we call Investigations, which is about automated incident response. That means that I'm working day to day with these AI tools and trying to figure out how we as an engineering team leverage them, but also working with a bunch of customers on how they use AI internally and how that can plug into the product that we're building. So kind of see it through the lens of various different customers wanting to use our stuff with all of the new technology coming onto the AI.
Perfect, great, thank you. So I'd like to start with a round robin question, and I'll go maybe to Claire first. For this group, how do you think about and how do you measure productivity?
Try not to measure productivity, if I'm really honest. I try and measure outcomes, because activity doesn't necessarily mean the right thing. I'm still a big fan of a lot of the older DORA style metrics. Nothing's perfect, but it's already provided us insights here in that like most people have gone through this experiment of doing more AI of yes, we've had more defects, even if we've been shipping quicker, but what is this actually meaning? Beyond that, I think we will need newer metrics. I just don't know what they look like yet because the Git AI option isn't useful now. It just goes, yeah, it's all generated by AI, and we're like, yeah, thanks very much, that's helpful. So I think a lot of the old stuff is not completely throwawayable yet, but I don't think we have great replacements either.
Yeah, thanks. Lawrence, you have thoughts on that one?
Yeah, so I think there are tons of problems with trying to measure productivity too directly, right? So I think it very much depends on what you're trying to measure productivity to achieve and what you're using it to understand. I think people are trying to adopt AI tools, and one of the things that AI coding agents can help you do is produce code a lot faster. So when we're trying to measure whether or not people are leveraging these tools to move quicker, one of the most direct ways with its flaws is actually measuring like how many PRs are people shipping, and then counterbalance that with how much work are we generating through, for example, instant response off the back of those PRs. What's the defect rate? What impact is this having on time to basically service customer requests and feature requests and bugs? So there's a ton of things that we do. Honestly, if it comes to how well are your team adopting AI, are they seeing actual improvements? Then the most direct way you can measure this is that you can see whether or not they are actually shipping faster. Obviously, then if they're shipping terrible stuff because it's all AI slop, you should see that in the defect rate, and then that's where you want to balance back from that. But I think that's how we've been looking at it. Like, are engineers actually able to ship code much faster using these tools? And is that commensurate with the amount that they're spending on the tools when we're trying to interpret ROI and things like that?
Got it, thanks. And Martin?
It's an interesting one. I do agree. I like the outcomes based. I mean, I think the traditional metrics are really useful and give you a great baseline, but ultimately, you know, it's aligning to what's valuable to the business. So if that's more throughput, then, you know, are the changes we're making and delivering more throughput? If it's they're spending more money in my shopping cart, then that's, you know, does it make dollars for the business ultimately? Is, you know, I know that sounds really brutal, but, you know, you have to align it to those business values. Like, what is the business trying to achieve? And then roll back from there.
Yeah, definitely. Looking at kind of both sides of that balance sheet, like Claire said, both, are you being more productive? And then also, are you slowing down in some ways? Are you having more incidents? Cool. So next, I think we're going to do a group poll on ROI of agent tools. Yeah, so you should see this now. So go ahead and vote, and we'll just get kind of a sample of how the audience is feeling here. And I think we'll see those results come in. But in the meantime, starting now with Lawrence, is it possible to specifically attribute productivity gains to your spending on AI?
Yeah, so I looked at this recently. I did a talk on accelerating sustainably with AI for lead dev. And as part of doing that, I did like a really big kind of deep dive into all the data that we have. So the stuff that I was looking at there was I was trying to look across all of our engineering team, which is about 50, so 50 engineers at this point, and trying to measure whether or not when they started picking up these AI tools and spending material amounts in them, whether or not you could see a proportional increase or a noticeable increase in like what they were shipping and how they were shipping, and then trying to track down whether or not the type of thing that they were shipping was changing too. So we were very interested in whether or not, because we have AI, is the nature of the average PR changing? Are we shipping much larger PRs? Because that also is something that we don't necessarily want to incentivize or need to think very carefully about it. But by the time I actually did the numbers, like what we ended up coming down to is, I think for about every $1 that we would go put into AI spend for engineering AI tools, we would have otherwise had to spend about $3.50 to try and achieve had we actually done that through hiring another engineer. And those are like numbers that take a ton into it. So I had to cohort engineers on whether or not they were tenured, like try and classify them into like when they started using AI, was this a relative increase because they were suddenly ramping, or was it because they've actually used AI to try and drive up that throughput? But honestly, like you end up counterbalancing this with your kind of interpretation when you're watching the engineering teams as a whole. There's just simply a ton of stuff that we do now in response to customer requests that, you know, we can get a customer request in and someone can hand that off to Cursor and they end up with a very quality PR that solves that customer request in no more than like, I don't know, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, where it's actually ran through the entire verification. And it also allows other people who are not engineers to start responding to these requests as well. Like we do have genuinely non-engineers who are building apps that we use internally or trying to prototype things. And when you start seeing those type of use cases, it really underscores when you then see in the numbers that engineers are moving a lot faster, that actually there probably is a big change here. I would feel much less confident in the numbers that I ended up producing if I wasn't seeing on a daily basis these kind of like use cases where people are genuinely doing things that they weren't possible to do before. But given that I can see that happening on a daily basis, and then when I started looking at the numbers, and you see some engineers are shipping anywhere between 2, maybe 3 times as much as they were before they ended up pulling up these AI tools, or we're doing large scale refactors that weren't previously possible. I felt much more confident in saying, actually, we're getting serious ROI on the investment that we're making.
Got it. So you have been able to produce a quantitative study, kind of, there's some specific parameters there, but you also want to balance that by getting your own gut feeling by observing how teams are doing in practice.
I think if we had the numbers just show us that this was like we were spending a bunch and we were shipping a bunch of stuff, but we weren't also seeing that the time between a customer providing their feedback and us actioning it was going down and other things. So going back to what Martin and Claire was saying about outcome-based measurements, if we weren't seeing those change too, then I'd be very deeply suspect in the numbers. But I think on the whole, what we've actually seen is that the quality of the changes that we're shipping are higher, the defect rate is actually going down, and the time to ship these things to customers is also decreasing. So I think you have to look at it holistically, and then PR throughput is a very blunt measure through which to see how AI adoption is moving through your engineering teams. And if you can get all of these things so that they kind of align, that should give you a sense of whether or not this is actually working for you. But obviously, if you start seeing maybe the outcomes aren't matching up with what you're seeing through like what you're measuring with PR throughput, that's when you'd want to dig further and actually be talking quite seriously with engineers and going, are these helping you? How do you feel about it? Like that's where I'd end up digging.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I see someone called out in the chat that metrics and measurements are subjective by nature, which is a good point. Yeah, Martin or Claire, I'm curious if you have thoughts on that. Do you generally agree? Do you think it is possible to attribute productivity to AI agents?
Yes, is the short answer. I do think you can. I think I know we're going to get to it a little bit later, but I do think there's ways to attribute that and be able to kind of measure it. I'd still think one of the key things is that you know not everybody had a great baseline for where they started from, and then to be able to then measure what the impact of using AI was, if that makes sense. So not everybody was recording good metrics of what was delivered, how often it was happening, and stuff like that. And to go retrospectively and do that is quite difficult. But I am, I do believe it's very possible, and we've been doing it. I mean, internally with our engineering teams in Harness for a while, and we can also talk to the productivity difference just because, the number of new major features that we deliver as a result has dramatically increased. Our CEO was talking about some, up to 10 a week major features delivered now, where we used to talk about maybe 1 or 2 a month. The whole velocity has changed dramatically.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, and then I guess to follow up on that with you, Martin, if we're thinking about creating a framework for evaluating agentic tools, what should go into that kind of framework? What are the kinds of things we should think about?
So it's really interesting because some of it is going to be very business specific, and some of it is kind of standard. So I do think you need things like the core DORA metrics. Absolutely, you should be tracking those kind of things, and it depends what you're using the AI tool for as well. But I also think you should absolutely 100% be able to attribute it. So, for example, if you think about a whole software delivery lifecycle, you should be able to say, hey, it was this Jira card, and there was this much spent in the coding, and this much in the PR, and this much in the testing, and maybe I don't know what else you might have. There's maybe using some AI in your resiliency. You should be able to track all of that spend across and have it attributed to the thing it was for. So essentially, you're able to say, hey, this feature cost $15 in AI spend, and it's made it to production successfully, and it is being used by our customers. And so, that's a good way to be able to track that across the whole piece. But that attribution piece is actually critical to being able to measure, and then once you've got that, you can then even start looking at your AI efficiency. Am I using the right model for the right task? Because that once we started doing this internally, I can tell you now that conversation came up very quickly. Why did this bug fix cost me $1,000? Oh, well, I used the frontier model and it went away and did a bunch of cycles, but it would have taken 5 minutes to fix if they hadn't used AI, kind of thing. So, which model you use and where you use it, where you apply it, that suddenly becomes a thing once you have that granular detail of, by feature, by fix, by change, everything that's changed and what the outcome is from the other end, which is, collecting metrics at the other end for adoption of those features, the bug leakage and all of those things.
Yeah,
So,
Claire, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I was going to kind of say I agree, and I think we can even take it further because our product folks here do a lot with AI. And an example I think is very growth specific, but I think it demonstrates a point because I gave my growth team like a carte blanche to go wild, like reimagine the whole thing here. And they, I'm going to shout out to my manager Romeo here for running with this, but he did a bunch of stuff and got the team to do a bunch of stuff around AI investigating the ideas or the experiments that they wanted to run, right through to even looking at the data from the feature flag software that we use to see what the uptake was, to see if hypotheses were being met or not. So that can be like actual model spend, obviously, all the things that Martin was talking about, but it's also that's a different kind of efficiency, if you like, a lot of that information can be synthesized and aggregated, which AI is great at, and just pull reports together and stuff like that. So I think you can make it quite efficient in different ways as well. And I think just going beyond the obvious, how many tokens do we spend on a PR, be coding or reviewing, we need to think bigger.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
do. Sorry, I
Oh no,
was going
please
to
go ahead.
say I do love the whole loop back. It sounds like you're doing something similar to what we do, which is where
Yeah,
it's not just the fact that features were deployed. It's
yeah,
actually having that full feedback loop that
yeah,
says it was adopted, it was not adopted, users do like it, they don't like it, so how much it's used, and then feeding that back. And then there's the whole conversation about, do you still do small changes because you want the feedback loop to work, so that
yeah.
you're not investing time and tokens in something that's not valid because the customers don't like it, or the functionality is just not used.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, and I think there's an interesting question here. Someone asked, did you have anyone on your team, did they kind of change behaviors to ensure that they're producing data that is valuable to track or measure? Claire, it sounded like in your team you had people kind of experiment there.
Yes, so they ironically experimented with experiments. But yes, that's what I kind of went like. Anything's on the table. Gave them that kind of I've got your back. Go figure stuff out for a month. And it again, this is where Romeo was really great at stepping up and encouraging them to think beyond the basics. Let's make it so that we can automate this through linear tickets and that kind of stuff. And it the not all process is bad process. I know I'm not the biggest fan of huge amounts of process, is why I don't survive in megacorps, but the right amount of process can really unlock you, and the team found that. So they did change the way they worked a bit there, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and you can see, I think hopefully all of you can see the poll results as well, but yeah, you can see about 53% of people said no, they have not been able to prove return on investment from AI tools to leadership. Yes, or sorry, 32% said yes, significant return, and then 21% were able to prove some small return on investment. So I think we can see it's not a simple problem to solve with just one answer. And Lawrence, anything you want to call out there that we didn't talk about that should go into a framework for evaluating AI tools?
Yeah, I mean, I guess like we spoke about this a bit when we were preparing for the panel, actually, but like establishing baselines is really, really important. and knowing whether, because like everyone here who's worked with AI knows how much stuff has changed in the industry in the last year and 2 years. I think it's very hard to look at how behavior was a year ago and trying to compare that with how people are behaving now and draw comparisons between them. So I think trying to figure out a sensible baseline when you are drawing these comparisons is really important. Like you may actually have just got way more effective at planning and delivering things because you're doing more upfront prep, because you can do the analysis much more thoroughly than you could before because it's a lot cheaper. And that might be more time spent in planning, less time spent in shipping, and you may be shipping less, but you're shipping much more effectively. And that would obviously corrupt the numbers if you're just using one dimension to try and have a look at it. So it really needs to be like measurements along all of the life cycle of how you're doing software development, not just at one particular stage. I think we've found this a lot with kind of our product tracks workload. So how long are you spending on incidents, which is ultimately kind of like a test of how long are you spending reacting to problems inside of your system. And we end up using that to try and measure, it's not just defect rate, but like how bad are the defects as well. And that has actually helped us track that our reactive time is going down rather than going up with the amount that we're actually trying to ship. So I would advise people to try and find counterbalancing metrics, not just pick one and like hold tight to it. You want to get a full kind of gamut of ways to measure your engineering team.
Yeah. Okay. And then, yeah, this relates kind of what Martin was talking about in terms of the full feedback loop. But is it possible to have a fully accurate baseline? I guess we can't really do an exact A/B test for this kind of thing.
Yeah, counterfactuals are really, really hard to establish in this situation. Like at the end of the day, I think you have to go with, if you find that you've tracked a number and the number has materially changed, make sure you don't take the number at face value, dig into the specific points that drove that data point, try and find some qualitative feedback or like try and find the actual data point and understand it so that you can emotively understand if this has actually proportionally made a big difference and people are doing things very differently, so that you can kind of get a sense of whether or not these numbers have just artificially inflated or if you're seeing someone behave in a very different way than they used to.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I feel like having that visibility from ideation through to the customer and back again, and all the steps that it takes, and we know that there's something like 30, 40 steps between the idea and it actually getting in front of a customer when you add in your testing and your security scanning and your resiliency testing and everything else that needs to happen, infrastructure provisioning, all of those things, all of those things are a step in the process of getting something from idea to production. And, and knowing what all those steps are, knowing how long they take. And, because and your thing about the individual numbers is a great one, because, one of the things that I see quite often is, we're shipping more code, but it's all stuck in test. Right, because there's a huge bottleneck there now, and maybe we're not applying AI in the right way in our testing, and that's something we need to address. Right, so it's a common flow. We should know what our path is and what that feedback looks like, and we should be able to measure most of those stages in terms of how long they're taking and where the bottlenecks are, where things are improving and where they're decreasing. And I do love the conflicting metrics. I when I first started doing DevOps, which is a very long time ago now, I remember attending a talk, I think it was done by somebody from the BBC, and they talked about these conflicting metrics as a great way to make sure that people, you get less gamification on the system. And I do love that.
Yeah, I like that as well. Kind of trying to challenge your own narrative rather than going in with an idea you're sort of trying to prove and finding metrics that justify that idea. I see one of our audience questions is a good segue here. So someone asked, with token costs rising, how can we justify the ever bigger costs for AI? So I think related to that, kind of when the landscape is changing so quickly, how do you create a plan for your organization? And I'll start maybe with you, Martin, if you're okay with that.
Sure. I mean, I have quite strong opinions on this, and I think it's true that AI costs are going up because, it's not so much that the costs are going up. Maybe the individual token price is going down, but the costs, you know, when you run an agent, or you know, you've got a harness and a whole bunch of agents, not harness the company, harness the AI harness. Unfortunate naming clash there. But when you're running that, you know, when you're running a harness, you're probably making way more requests than you would from those, you know, early single chat requests where it's doing those things. So, you know, even if the price is coming down, and I do also worry because you know, generally right now, what we pay for a token cost and what that actually costs the AI model companies are very different unless you're hosting your own. If on your own infrastructure, is you know, is very different, and they're making a loss right now, so it is going to go increase. And I do think that ultimately, like the governance and the management of that cost, and you know, probably the democratization of that cost. So I think it's going to start coming down. In fact, internally, I can already see what my budget is, how much I'm spending. And, you know, yes, we can get increases and have use cases against that. But I do think that is truly something that's coming, where that kind of control of budget is actually pushing down the chain. You know, before it would be, hey, I'm buying this for the organization, and we're, you know, this is how much we're spending on it. I think now what's happening is they're saying, no, we're pushing it out, and everybody has this budget, even if it's a small budget, that they are then responsible for, and use it judiciously, if that makes sense, because I just think that's the way it's going to go.
Yeah, so you think in the future we'll have more tools basically in order to kind of measure and govern these things.
I do. I do. You know, even internally right now, you know, we're measuring all the queries that actually happen inside our coding agents, etc. So we can actually see what queries are being written, and what the impact is, and how many cycles they use, and all of those things. So you can actually get right into that kind of detail level of, hey, this is how the developers are writing their queries and spending it, and they're attributed and all the rest of it. So I think, and that's happening across the whole life cycle. You know, even if you're building agents and deploying them, getting that level of granularity and understanding, you know, maybe we should have used a lower cost model for this, or you know, done it a different way, or maybe this just doesn't need an agent at all, and we can do it in a deterministic way that is way quicker and more efficient.
Yeah. Claire or Lawrence, do you have thoughts on this in general, the idea of planning for your budget?
Yeah. It's an interesting one for me, because I also tend to agree with Martin here about, and this is one of the reasons N8N exists, is about automation in general, with or without AI, and that something that we're learning from our customers, quite apart from code, and I've spoken to a lot of our enterprise customers about this. It is about the governance of things, of what's going on. It is about, should this actually have an agent in it, or should it be deterministic? So we're getting if you like, I'm lucky that I get a second view on this beyond the code, and I think that's going to become true. Right now, we're all AIing all of the things because all of our employers are going, oh, you have to be pilled in this, you have to figure this out. And I think we're going to get to a point where we backtrack some of that from a let's be sensible point of view. It's like everything went serverless for a little bit until they realized that didn't work for a lot of things. So yeah, I definitely think that the governance angle is coming. It's just how quickly and how.
Yeah, Lawrence, how about you?
Yeah, I think so one thing that's interesting is we're going out and we're selling this investigations product, so the AI SRE product that we've just launched. When we're talking with customers at the moment, there is a lot of like concern from those customers around like how you go about pricing it. And lots of our customers are saying that they would prefer a like static price that they can agree up front rather than it be metered, just because predictability is actually kind of like becoming a big concern, especially when internally these coding agents are kind of, you plot it on a graph, right? It just kind of looks very deeply concerning if you're a VP of finance or someone who's responsible for tracking the numbers. So I think predictability around outcomes is going to be a like big theme over the next couple of years. That said, like, you know, we're watching the unit cost of us running an investigation against an incident. And there's so much stuff that we're doing around either optimizing that harness or adopting new models, which is allowing us to drop the cost on this stuff. And I can just see it now, like with for example, the OpenAI's Luna model, where they just discounted it by 80%. That model is like crazy capable, and like if you went back 2 years ago, it would be everything, and even 1 year ago, it was pretty competitive, and now it's at 1/20th the price. So I think the interesting thing here is, when does like Jevons paradox stop kicking in? Like, when do these models stop getting so much cheaper that you find way more use cases for them, or they're so cheap that you can apply them in many different ways, so your actual usage ends up ballooning? Like, when does that actually find an equilibrium? And I think the difficulty around planning at the moment is, as the technology is changing so fast, what you think is possible now and what you're trying to budget for and plan for might not take into account what would be possible in 6 months. And it might be, as a business, that in 6 months, the thing that has become possible is so attractive to you that you want to review exactly how much you want to spend on it, because potentially the ROI on that new possibility is really, really high. And I think that's where a lot of the unpredictability comes from. But yeah, loads of people across the industry right now are screaming for price stability. That will come, and I think we'll move a bit more towards outcome-based pricing when it comes to kind of SaaS-hosted AI solutions. For coding agents, honestly, this is yet to be settled. No one knows if people are going to move across the open source models that they run on base 10 or Fireworks, or even run themselves, or if the frontier labs will continually decrease costs whilst hopefully maintaining the margin that allows them to survive. It's really all to play for at this point.
Yeah, and in the meantime, all of us have to remain nimble.
It's interesting because it's not like we haven't done this before. I mean, this is kind of what happened when everybody started moving to cloud, and then that was convenient, it was faster, it was flexible, and then years later we were like, oh no, we need to manage all that cost. I think the difference is that while we did that over about 10 years with cloud, we we're doing it in months with AI. And some of those lessons definitely apply. Some of the lessons from what we did, with the big move to cloud, I think some of those lessons definitely apply today when you're talking about how you manage and govern your AI spend. But I do think it is just happening so much faster, like 10x faster, just like everything else with AI, right? So
Cool. Yeah, and then speaking of things going much faster, to change directions a little bit, Claire, what are some risks that we're not discussing or we're not thinking enough about in this space?
I think it as an engineering culture, not company specific, but in general as well. It's like, hey, we sped up code, amazing. All right, well now there's all these review bots. Now we've got some security scanners and stuff. I feel like we're playing whack-a-mole with where the bottleneck is. I think we actually need to be brave enough, willing enough, depending on company culture, to completely revisit what software development lifecycle looks in an agentic world. I don't have answers. I wish I did, because I'd probably make a fortune. But this is where I started out with the growth team. I was like, okay, let's reimagine what we could do. Is it that far away from where we were? Not like revolutionary wise, but it's a stepping stone to at least thinking differently. I can't do that for all of the product engineering. There's too many moving parts. But I think that's where we do need to get to as an industry. And I think it's a risk that we're just applying AI at each step that we had before. We had those steps because product alignment was hard, because building cost was expensive. Do we need those steps in the same way that we had before? So I think that's a risk to not actually getting the real ROI that we could.
Yeah, kind of leaning into that unpredictability and instability to try and experiment and rewrite the playbook, as people say.
Basically.
It's really interesting. That's something that we talk about a lot, that autonomous software delivery. How do you get to autonomous software delivery? What does that look like? And leaning back into something you said earlier, Claire, that mix of where does the agent make sense in that whole life cycle, and where does the existing deterministic type flows work, and how can you leverage the agents to use the deterministic things at the right time, at the right point in the process, and making sure that it understands the whole, has the right context to do that. And that can be applied across all the different parts of the life cycle. But I do think I think you're right. You have to look at it and say, what does software delivery look like in an AI driven world, and rather than trying to just hit the next pain point, actually look holistically across the piece and say, if I was starting from scratch, knowing that I do need to do all these things because these are non-negotiable, because maybe I work in a regulated environment, I absolutely want to test, I need right auditing, I need, you know, the right change controls, I need the right governance in place, and all of that. I still want to manage my infrastructure cost as well as my AI cost. You know, looking at all of that and saying, okay, where have we got great deterministic stuff, and where can AI help us make smart decisions and make those faster, make sure that they're audited, and then, you know, accelerate that whole process across the entire piece.
Yeah, there's an interesting question here, I think kind of about ownership, that ties into another question. So I guess, do we think it's on individuals and line level leadership to try and control spending, or is that something that should be solved at a higher level with the tool itself? And I guess I'll start with you, Lawrence.
So my background is I used to be a principal SRE, and I've obviously moved from doing SRE to moving to a company that offer incident response software and help companies figure out how to do their incident response. So I've thought for a lot of my career about feedback loops and trying to help ownership be a thing that can positively impact change and positively impact something to move in the right direction. I'm a big fan of this idea that, like, the developers, who are the people who are operating these tools, have some level of ownership over the budgets that they're using. So I think if you look at our engineering team, for example, we use AI disproportionately more inside of the AI team. And the reason for that is that we do a bunch of AI analysis and AI testing and loops inside of our teams who are building these AI tools. So I think, like, the idea of us applying some uniform budget cost across all of engineering just doesn't really make sense. But if you as a team have gone back to the business and explained your need and your use case, then applying kind of a sensible watermark on what your usage is per person across the team that maybe you can very quickly, like, bump over those budgets for, would actually probably assert, like, a level of back pressure to people using, like, egregious cost. But yeah, I don't think that I've seen people do this particularly well right now, probably in part because we're still in the kind of try and figure out how to use this as maximally well as you possibly can stage of the process. But I do see us moving towards a world where, like, you as a developer are essentially given, like, some level of fair quota, and that quota is discussed and understood within the context of your work, and your team has that budget and you can allocate it as you need.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And kind of balancing, you know, the need for flexibility day to day, or depending on what someone's working on, with the need for some kind of stability for the organization at large.
Yeah, and I think the thing that is kind of, like, shocking a bit to me is, like, the amount that you can end up as a developer nowadays spending on an agent. Like, if you're using one of these front-end models, it is really feasible for you to blow through about $1,000 a day. Now, that is essentially contract rate for an engineer, like a pretty senior one too. So what we've kind of done organizationally is handed every engineer this kind of budget or this credit card, and we're saying, hey, please do spend this wisely. You could either spend it on AI, or, you know, you could actually just hire someone to help you out with this job. Now that obviously in even today's world would be just totally crazy, but actually mechanically from a finance perspective, it's the same thing. And I think asking engineers at an individual level to make a judgment call on what is a judicious level of spend is something that we've never delegated to individuals with that much control before. And I don't think that it actually makes sense to be putting it on the individual to make that judgment call, because they're lacking so much of the organizational context on whether or not that would be sensible spend. So I think it does need to be set as an expectation by the organization on how much you should be spending given the work that you're doing. And then you're allowed to kind of boost through these limits if and when you choose to.
Yeah, agreed. It does feel a bit unfair. There's sort of a specific question here in the chat. How do you track and visualize cost? Do you use a dedicated observability tool, or do you just kind of push data into existing tools? Anyone want to speak to that?
I mean, we at Harness, we use the dedicated tool for that, in terms of, you know, and we actually merge all three, like I would say all three types of spend together. The kind of, you know, the AI spend, the infrastructure spend, as in the running agent spend, and as well as the, the developer and all the efficiency stuff. We view that in all one place. And we would want to do that specifically because, generally people want to view it in different slices, which comes back to the attribution point. But, that might be by context. How much am I spending by model? How much am I spending by use case? But then equally, how much am I spending by Jira ticket or by team or by, how much am I spending on test? How much so being able to slice that data actually gets you to kind of what Lawrence was and Claire were both talking about, really, which is then being able to say, hey, based on this product and how much it brings in, this is a sensible budget for the return. This is a sensible budget to spend, but you have to be able to see and quantify that in a way to say this was a meaningful spend. So I think it's a little bit of both, but we certainly we do that inside of one tool that allows us to see all of those things together because they all overlap with each other.
We're not quite as sophisticated yet. There's a lot that finance are wrangling from the main dashboards, and we work with them, or I have a monthly with them. I would like to get to where Martin is, definitely. I think we need to. But I think depending on what you're doing and how you can do it, you can use OTel because we've augmented something where we put the token stuff in extra headers in the OTel. So that we can pull that back out. As I said, we're not pulling all this into finance yet. That's still in the cloud space, but it is something that we're looking at. And I do wonder, and I know there's going to be 1,000 tool vendors up in my LinkedIn DMs after this, but I do wonder if it's going to be company specific because how you define the ROI is going to be very, how is your finance set up? How is your engineering set up? How is product set up? And all of those things and what you care about. And how you want to attribute stuff. I think right now certainly is going to be quite custom. And again, with AI, we can hack a thing together to do that.
Yeah, definitely. And sorry,
Oh.
we just have 3 more
Go
minutes.
ahead.
So Lawrence, if you
go.
want to wrap us up, and then we'll go into basically how do we expect this space to change over the next 6 months? Lawrence, you want to kick us off there?
I was going to do the most annoying thing and say, like, you can use AI to help you out with this. So like for any of this like data analysis where you have to kind of interpret numbers and slice and dice by different dimensions, like we have a bunch of AI skills that we run on a regular cadence, maybe daily, that dump reports into Pulse channels. That then people can monitor and they actually flag and they raise tickets with us whenever something looks like it's a problem. They're actually not that hard to build, and they are really, really useful, and they help catch things that you otherwise would have let go slip. Sorry, Amanda, I'll send back to you for finishing this.
Yeah, no, all good. Yeah, do you want to say, to close us out, how do you expect this space to change over the next 6 months or even 3 months?
God, this space being just AI in general.
Yeah, but also kind of governance, cost control, measuring.
So I think one thing that is going to become really interesting is that right now we have companies all over the industry who are investing both a serious amount of money in the AI spend that they're making, but they're also actually investing like what previously would have felt like a disproportionate amount of engineering headcount into trying to make internal AI investments to make this stuff work. So I think right now where you don't have products that can be pulled off the shelf to help you do certain things because AI hasn't got to that point yet, there are lots of internal teams who are doing the same work across all these companies. And maybe for a large company, you could have anywhere up to like 20 people working on internal AI investment. I think what we're going to see is amongst pressure to reduce AI spend in total, you'll also see pressure to go, wait a sec, so we're staffing this team with 20 people continually full time. Are there products that we could pull in that are maybe more effective or more efficient that we could use instead of us having essentially 20 of our best engineers who otherwise would be building product, like working on this thing that could actually be commoditized? So I think there'll be a lot more adoption of kind of off-the-shelf tools, especially as the more like next-gen AI products end up hitting the market in a meaningful way.
I think total cost of ownership is going to become important, basically, in a way that we've forgotten about for the last 3 years. To back your point up, Lawrence.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. Martin, how about you?
I mean, I think it's still aligned with the cost. I also think the governance piece is coming there. Since we prepped for this, I did read the article about Stripe acquiring OpenRouter, which is or potentially acquiring OpenRouter, which is that that ability to route to a specific model in a specific place. I know many enterprises are building that kind of functionality themselves. I just thought it was interesting that a company like Stripe would do that. And I think it shows where they believe the market is going in terms of governing and managing where you're spending your money on your AIs and which models you use, and automating that with governance, with rules, and we even do that internally as well. So, I think that's somewhere it's developing. I think that's going to come a long way over the next 3, 6, 12 months, because I think that's where a lot of that management of cost will really come in, where you can govern which model it goes to automatically. And to Lawrence's previous point, maybe take some of that load away from the engineers and the testers and everything else, because it can do some of that in a smart way.
Definitely, thank you. So sadly, we are out of time, so we will pause here. But thank you so much to our panelists for contributing, and for everyone watching for adding questions and all that. We hope that you enjoyed this session, and we will continue on Slack. So if you have any questions that didn't get answered, please join us there. And I think if you take anything away from this, think like a scientist, look for metrics kind of at every stage of the process, like Claire was saying, that full feedback loop, and don't just look for kind of the metric that will underscore the point you're trying to make, but also those counterbalancing metrics as well. And thank you, everybody. We will see you on the internet.